Now I'm going to talk about vocabulary, specifically vocabulary assessment and vocabulary instruction. But first, what is vocabulary? Okay, we know that it's one of the big five of reading, okay, along with comprehension, phonics, phonemic awareness, and fluency. It's a prerequisite to comprehension. We cannot understand what we read if we don't understand the meanings of individual words. There's different types of vocabulary, so listening vocabulary, what we hear, speaking vocabulary, so expressive, reading vocabulary, okay, and writing vocabulary. And vocabulary, of course, focuses primarily on the meaning of words and the meaning of words in different contexts. So why do we need to teach vocabulary? As children grow, words become much more difficult. So by age 3 or 4, they have this huge growth spurt where they learn hundreds of words fairly quickly. But then as they start going to school and as we start progressing through school, words, vocabulary, readings become much more complex. Vocabulary knowledge is linked to comprehension, as I mentioned earlier, so there's a very strong connection between knowing word meaning and understanding what we read. Okay, also to address the 30 million word gap, which if you took my 342 class last semester, you'll remember as the number of words that kids from lower income backgrounds and the number of words that kids from higher income backgrounds know by the age of 4. So the thought is that between those two groups, the higher level group or kids from higher socioeconomic status backgrounds hear 30 million more words. At-risk students, okay, are less likely to use strategies such as context clues to determine word meaning. So again, being able to link that strategy use and strategy instruction is very important when we're working with students, at-risk students, students with disabilities. But unfortunately, vocabulary is often ignored when teaching reading. So we're going to start off with vocabulary assessment and talk about some of the ways we assess student knowledge of vocabulary, and I'll go through a couple of baseline assessments and also progress monitoring tools. So there's different ways to assess vocabulary knowledge. We have standardized measures such as the Woodcock-Johnson. There's several reading tests within the Woodcock-Johnson. The Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test. And then we have curriculum-based assessments, so things like oral definitions. So we might ask a student, what's the definition of the word throw? Okay, and maybe show them 3 different pictures, and hopefully they would choose this picture here as the correct answer. So that's just one way to do a curriculum-based assessment. You can use true-false questions. So is the meaning of cup, or is a cup something we sit on, true or false? Multiple choice questions, so we would give a word, maybe several choices of the meaning of the word. Students would have to choose the correct answer. Matching terms with definitions. Okay, so just having a list of words maybe on the left-hand side of a page with definitions on the right-hand side of the page and asking students to match the correct definition. Can be a baseline assessment. It can be something you use for progress monitoring. And we can make these as easy or difficult based on students' level of understanding. We can use questioning to measure deeper knowledge. So for example, I might ask you in class, what is a standard? Okay, how can you use a standard to backward plan? What else does standard mean? So by questioning, we can have a deeper level of knowledge by thinking about how this word is used in different ways, how it's used, for example, in your curriculum unit, maybe some other synonyms for standard. So again, just kind of building that deeper knowledge about specific words. Another way is to use morphographic rules. Okay, and this is just connecting different words to a larger concept or category. So this is something that sometimes our students have difficulty with, is being able to take a group of words and figure out how to classify them. So for example, I can give you some words related to a guitar, drums, and a saxophone. And if I ask you to put those words in a category, you would likely put them into a category called musical instruments. Another way is to change the meaning, okay, or have students change the meaning of words by what's called morphing the word. Okay, so we can take a word like tie. Okay, if we add a D to the end of tie, it becomes tied. Okay, it changes its meaning. If we add a prefix to tie, the prefix un, then changes the meaning of the word tie. If we add the prefix re, that changes the meaning. If we add the plural s, that also changes the meaning. And if we add an ing to the word, it changes the meaning. So by morphing the word in these different ways, students can see how these different prefixes and different suffixes not only have individual meanings, but also change the individual meaning of certain words. Vocabulary self-assessment, and if you think back to the 6 different facets of understanding, self-assessment, self-evaluation is one of the deeper levels of understanding. And through self-assessment, you can make students more aware of the depth of their knowledge, okay, of specific concepts by maybe rating their knowledge of words, vocabulary on a scale. This can be used before and after a lesson, okay, to demonstrate growth and depth of knowledge, or maybe some key vocabulary terms. So if you think about baseline assessments, if you think about wanting to find out where students are before you're going to teach a unit or a lesson, this is a good way to, these are good assessments to use to find that out. A couple of specific vocabulary self-assessments. One is called the Vocabulary Knowledge Scale, and this is a self-report assessment. This is typically administered as a pretest, okay, maybe before a lesson on a certain reading or text or a curriculum unit is taught, and then again after either a lesson or maybe after a unit to assess how much the student has grown. And on this, students identify their level of knowledge, okay, about each teacher's selected word. This format, okay, and scoring guide fall into the following 5 categories, okay. So number 1 would be, I've never seen this word before. 2, I've seen this word, but I don't know what it means. 3, I've seen this word, and I think it means this, okay. Or 4, I know this word, it means, okay, and they would write their answers in these boxes below. And then 5, which would be the highest level of knowledge. I know this word, I can use it in a sentence. My sentence is, okay, and they would actually write a sentence in the space provided. So on the left-hand side, you have your words, okay, and then you have the students just rate their knowledge of the word. If students automatically just check off 4 and 5, but they don't write anything, you'd have to make them write something. They have to show that they know what it means if they do fill in those boxes. And you can score them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you can actually use this to get averages of word knowledge. Okay, so if you have 10 words here, you can maybe get an average score of 3.5 prior to the lesson. And then your post-test, you can do some similar words and average, hopefully your average score would go up to say 4.5 or 4.7 or 4.8. So you can do it, you can use these numbers and these scales in a couple of different ways. A second type of assessment is the vocabulary recognition task. Okay, and this is a teacher constructed yes/no task. Either they know it, the word, or they don't. Okay, and this is used to estimate what students know about vocabulary in a specific content area. Like the vocabulary knowledge scale, it combines both self-report, okay, with knowledge that the students would demonstrate. So for example, you can create a recognition test of a list of say 24 or 25 words that are related to a specific content area, and you might choose 16, okay, that are directly related to the content, and then 7 words that are what are called foils. Okay, so they are words that have absolutely nothing to do with the content, and you would see if students were able to tell the difference between both. So they would circle the words that they're able to read, okay, and that are related to that specific topic. So if you had, say, a science lesson, okay, about rocks, okay, this might be a something you would use as a pretest, and you would ask the students to circle the words, okay, that you are sure that have to do with rocks. So they would go through, they would circle whatever words they think are related to rocks. You've got some foils here, like migrate, string, delete, ankle. Okay, so these words are put in there, okay, purposely, again, as foils, okay, to see if students do misunderstand one of those words as having something to do with the content, which in this case is rocks. So then you would just simply put the correct number of words that were identified. If they incorrectly chose any of the distractors or the foils, you would put those here, subtract it, and then the known word score would go in this box. Okay, and you can also then get a percentage correct down here and do both number right and percentages. As a post-test, you can have the students complete both the recognition task, but also to categorize those selected words under headings that you provide on what's called a concept web. So this is a type of graphic organizer where the students would then take the words from a particular unit. These are actually type of insects, so they're not related to the previous example that we just saw. But these would be types of insects, places they live, insects' body parts, and then other insect words. And then students would have to classify them or categorize them. Okay, and again, this shows a deeper level of knowledge. Okay, so if they did the first part of this test, you may have just been looking at whether or not they knew that these words related to insects, but here you're actually then categorizing it and to see how much they learned about those words and about the context that those words would be in. Some progress monitoring tools, once you do take a pretest and you design your lesson or lessons, okay, you will need to monitor progress on a daily basis. So I'm going to show you a couple different progress monitoring tools, and there are many more, but these are just a couple that we'll take a look at in class as well. One are graphic organizers, and again, this helps students visualize relationships between words. You can use these with explicit vocabulary instruction. You can use these as part of a lesson. Okay, these can also be used for classroom assessments because they give you kind of a quick peek at how students are doing on that particular lesson. So are they learning those vocabulary words that you want them to learn based on their baseline pretests? One graphic organizer that is shown to be effective are called alpha boxes. So these can not only activate students' prior knowledge, but they can also be used to collect vocabulary words during a unit of study. So in a sense, it's kind of like a student's own personal word wall. Okay, so with the alpha boxes, you would give these to students at the beginning of a unit. They would fill in all of the vocabulary that they know about that specific topic. And then the teacher or you can quickly then assess student knowledge and figure out how many words they actually do know. As the unit progresses, as your lessons go from day to day, students then add to these alpha boxes as new words are introduced. Alpha boxes can also be used to stimulate writing about a topic. Okay, so students will have that graphic organizer in front of them. They'll have all of the words on that graphic organizer, and they'll be able to pick and choose words in order to write sentences or in order to write maybe a report on that specific topic. Okay, so this is just an example of what one type of alpha box can look like. There's all the letters of the alphabet. And from a specific content that you might be teaching, you would ask students to simply, find an interesting and important word, okay, and then based on the beginning letter, they would write the words in those boxes. Another way to get students thinking about vocabulary, another way to assess how they're maybe learning a certain topic, can be with brainstorming. So what we have here is kind of a word web or a spider web. There's different things you can call it, and you can have as many lines as you want coming off of this. But you would give the students a word like hurricanes. Say you're studying weather, for example, and you have a lot of reading content on weather-related themes. So you want them to know about hurricanes. So you can ask them to fill in this word web. What are some words that are associated with hurricanes? It's windy. Okay, it's a storm. Okay, there's rain associated with hurricanes, thunder, and I'm sure you can come up with several more when you're working with students. But this kind of helps students think more deeply about words, be able to see connections between different words and how they fit together. Another graphic organizer is what's called a Frayer model, okay, F-R-A-Y-E-R, okay, and that's where you can have, say, a visual like this, or you'd have the vocabulary word in the middle. You would have the students define the word, okay, and they can do this in different ways. They can find it in the dictionary. They can try to define it on their own. They can look within the reading, okay, and try to use context clues to define it. They would give a visual, so some type of picture of what they think this word represents. And then some examples. What are some examples of this word? And then non-examples. Okay, so maybe what are some things that are the opposite of this word? So you can kind of look at this as synonyms maybe and antonyms. Okay, and that's just a different way that you can approach this. So a Frayer model, okay, this is a modified Frayer model, but the word in the middle would be tall. Okay, you can see that this is an example, okay, of what's tall. Okay, and this is a non-example, okay, or an antonym. Some examples of things that are not tall, and then some things that are tall. The only thing missing here is an actual definition. Okay, so those are just a few progress monitoring tools, and again, we'll look at several more. There are many more described in Chapter 6 of your textbook, so that would be a good place to take a look at some ideas that you can use for your unit or you can use for your students in your practicum placements. The last part here is vocabulary instruction, okay, or how we teach vocabulary. So vocabulary is typically learned either indirectly or directly. So indirectly is kind of that osmosis method. Children learn the meaning of most words just through hearing them, through talking, okay, having conversations with adults, with peers, seeing words, just all these words in the environment, and then maybe just figuring these words out on their own. Unfortunately, for a lot of the students that we work with, they don't learn words in an indirect way. Some students do. Some students are better at this than others. But for us as special educators, it's also important to know that we need to use direct teaching strategies. So children also learn vocabulary directly, okay, when they are explicitly taught both individual words and then word learning strategies. So we have to do both of those things when we teach vocabulary. Okay, some examples of indirect instruction, creating a word-rich environment, so things like word walls, charts and graphs, having labels around the classroom, poems, songs, and stories, okay, that you often see in younger children classrooms, listening centers, classroom libraries, and think about your practicum placements, the classroom or classrooms that you're in. What are some examples of words that you see up on the wall? Okay, how do teachers use words? Okay, are the words up there randomly? Are they related to content? So that's one thing you can kind of take a look at and see how your teachers and teachers in your school are doing this. So an example, a couple of different examples of word walls. Okay, here there's actual words associated with letters. Okay, here's an example of a listening center. So we've got some maybe audio books here. So it's kind of a close-up of books on tape. Another way of indirect instruction is oral language development, okay, which you probably talked a lot about in your 342 class. So just creating opportunities in your class for purposeful talk. So think pair share, book clubs, literature circles, having talks about books. As a teacher yourself, modeling the use of rich and interesting language. So not calling, say, your audio books and your books in your library things or stuff, but actually using words like tape recorder, microphone, textbook, poem, fiction book. Whatever it is you can do to kind of use different words is important, and your students will learn from watching you. And just be clear and specific in your own word choices. Okay, and using interesting words where appropriate is always a good idea. Another way is read alouds. Okay, so just reading books out loud, having students maybe read with you or doing choral reading. And this just builds listening vocabulary. It helps build language. It helps develop a sense of text structure. So if you're reading a story, students can see that stories have a beginning, say, middle, and end. You can model what fluent reading looks like. And you can give students exposure to literature and vocabulary that they might not be able, either because they don't have the ability or cannot access certain things, or they just can't read it themselves. So it kind of widens their world, so to speak. It also builds student background knowledge. So when we talk about explicit instruction, again, it's often used interchangeably with direct instruction. So some things you can do that are just sort of general strategies. You can teach words before reading. So for example, if you have a story in a certain literature book, or maybe if you're using News to You or something like that, you can go through the story and pull out words that you know students might have some difficulty with, and then actually teach the meaning of those words before you even have the students read that story or that book. Teach the use of tools or strategies that's going to help promote independent word learning. And then using instructional activities that lead toward ownership. Okay, so being able to let students know that they can use this word. They not only know what it means, but that they take some ownership of it, and they're able to maybe speak it, use it in a sentence, relate it to other words, related to their own experiences. So whatever it is you can use to make kind of literature and reading come alive for students will help them learn these vocabulary words in a much more effective and a much deeper way. So which words should we teach explicitly? There's 3 levels. Level 1 words are everyday words, so some basic words that usually don't require instruction. Clock, baby, happy, walk, some of our typical sight words. Extended words, so more high frequency words for students who are a little bit more mature, who might know some synonyms and antonyms and be able to use words interchangeably. Got some examples there. And then expert words. Okay, and these are words that are typically what we also call academic language. Okay, so these are words that are often just limited to maybe a specific subject area like science or a specific area like math, algebra, geometry, geography. Okay, there's lots of words that are just associated with that, and students rarely see them. So these are words that we typically or most frequently have to provide instruction on. So with teaching word learning strategies, it could be something just how to use a dictionary or how to go online and find the online dictionaries. How to use information about word parts. Okay, so what does a prefix do to a word when you add it to a word? What does a suffix do to a word? Um, and there's a way to do that called structural analysis. And then how to use context clues to determine word meaning. So how to look at the words around a specific word to try to figure out what that word means. One explicit and direct way to teach vocabulary is called text talk. Okay, so text talk kind of is based around this theory that students learn vocabulary best when we're kind of somewhere in the middle here, okay, where we're not throwing too much at them, okay, but also not throwing anything at them at all. So text talk is kind of a way to interact with students, but also to give them some freedom to explore on their own. And you can use this as a teacher working one-on-one with a student or with a group of students. You can teach students how to do this so that they can do it with each other. And text talk is something that we're going to practice in class next Wednesday. So I will come in with some instructions and you'll get a chance to practice this and see how it works. Another explicit strategy that has an evidence or research base is structural analysis. So that's just the ability to pick apart words, to look at the structures, maybe to break them into pronounceable syllables or parts. So it's that whole idea of blending words together or segmenting them. Looking at prefixes, suffixes, syllables. We teach basic syllabication rules, okay, to help students. And then teach students how to use a procedure to figure out unfamiliar words. So again, the whole idea of trying to get them to use these strategies to become more independent. So a dissect strategy is something that is used as a systematic way for students to figure out unfamiliar words. And we'll also go through that strategy in class on Wednesday. And this is just what the dissect strategy looks like. Okay, so I'll let you kind of read through that. And again, like I said, we'll take a look at this in more depth when we meet on Wednesday. So on Wednesday, okay, we're going to practice with different vocabulary assessments. We're also going to use the text talk strategy and the dissect strategy to kind of get practice and get familiar and kind of just see how these, try these on, see how they fit kind of thing. You're also going to be assigned to a group, okay, and you're going to be actually completing a 3-stage UDL activity using a vocabulary standard related to a content area. So you'll start off with stage 1, you'll do all the essential questions, big ideas, go to stage 2, choose some assessments, and then you're going to actually start to talk about coming up with learning activities in stage 3. Okay, so make sure you bring your laptop to class because we will likely be using Google Documents to do this. So I will see you on Wednesday.